Woods, Jr., he's a senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, author of the upcoming book, Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. We're talking about Road to Serfdom. I don't know what happened to my copy. Here it is. Road to Serfdom. When we were talking about propaganda, you've got to find a bad guy first,
yep.
right? And you got to sell that.
Yeah, absolutely. In the Soviet Union, it's the saboteur, it's bad weather, it's conspirators. I mean, you see it in the book Animal Farm. That's essential. And what helps also in our case is that American kids, from the time they're in first grade, are taught a narrative of American history in which the government is there. They're composed of wonderful, selfless public servants. Mm-hmm. The public sector is full of people who, if they had their chance, they would employ you in the mines 100 hours a week at 2 cents a day, and we certainly don't want to go back to that. So thank heavens for our wise overlords. And people believe this. A lot of our people believe.
So what does he say in Road to Serfdom about greed or about capitalism or the free market system and being able to have sanity? Because that's what he's after, greedy people.
If you look at centrally planned economies, which is the target of his book, are we going to say those economies are not organized by greed? Except the greed is placed differently. This time it's the greed of the bureaucrats, the apparatchiks. There's always a two-tier system. In this case,
the labor unions here.
The labor unions. But in the centrally planned economies, it was the people running the show. They got the good cars, they got the medical care, and everybody else, in effect, was a serf. So you're going to say that system isn't run by greed?
How different is that, though? Let me ask the audience. I mean, who gets the good medical care? Now, under this new system that they have, who gets the best medical care? Congress. Yeah, Congress. Yeah. Congress gets it. So, I mean, it's the same exact story. But they also, and you've touched on it here, they also want to make everybody in Washington, and this is Woodrow Wilson 101, the administrators have nothing to gain, so they're good guys. That gives them the power to distribute wealth and to have welfare systems. What is the road to serfdom? What does that even mean?
Well, when he talks about the road to serfdom, what he's warning about is that people think that there's a way to centrally plan an economy or run a society or engage in some sort of planning that doesn't involve methods that we would find utterly distasteful and barbaric. And that, in fact, what you think you're doing is bringing about prosperity for everybody. What you're instead doing is moving us along a road that can lead to places nobody wants to go to, all in the name of providing everybody with security, just like a serf. A serf had security. He was going to be fed. Sure, he's stuck on the land. He can't choose his occupation. And some other person has an initial claim on his income, but he's not going to die.
Right.
And so in exchange for that, you get security.
And the reason why Europe didn't mind serfdom is because they had come out of slavery. Serfdom, we view as slavery, not hard slavery like early 20th century, colonial America and the rest of the world, not in chains, et cetera, but serfdom was slavery light. It was you work, you do your own hours, whatever, you just give me the bushel of grain.
Right.
And you can marry whoever you want, so it's not slavery. But that's kind of the system we're creating here, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and it's starting to come apart, especially as we see in Europe. A lot of these impossible promises that governments have made, all with supposedly good intentions, are coming apart. And in the meantime, the citizens have become so tethered to government, they don't know how to live otherwise. So now we're going to start to see riots across Europe. The possibility that people in their 20s, in their teens, could have a decent life is being destroyed by systems that are going to require these kids, because of the aging of the population, to work until they're ready to drop dead. They will never be able to retire, and the system's going to collapse anyway. And if anybody thinks that a few speeches delivered off a teleprompter is going to fix that, then the government schools are worse than we thought.
Let me ask you this, because I cannot convince 80% of the country, 90% of the country, even people are on my side, that there's no difference between the socialists of the Nazi regime and the socialists of the communist regime. Isn't he the first guy that said, there's no difference here? There's no difference.
He has a chapter in the book called The Socialist Roots of Nazism, which is a very unfashionable thing to say, because we all think that National Socialism is about wearing funny hats and having a swastika. But he's getting to the root of what is it really about. And what it's really about is a hatred of the old classical liberal, by which I mean free market order. That's what it is hatred of. And that's why it was very easy for people to move from one party to the other, be a communist one day, a Nazi the next. What you share in common is the common enemy. You hate the free market. You have to engage in some sort of planning. And, of course, Hitler, it wasn't too difficult for him to find what his enemy would be.
But see, here's the problem. And, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day. To understand the reaction of 1913 and giving us the Fed, you have to understand the collapse of in 1908. To understand that one, you have to understand, what was it, 1893. I mean, free markets come up and they collapse. They come up and they collapse. It's a cycle. But that's how they get you. Because they say, we're not going to have that. Don't worry about that. We're going to take, that was the promise of the central bank. We're going to take all that risk out.
And yet what's interesting, Glenn, is that what they always do is they create these problems and then they pose as the ones who are going to solve them. If you look at the period from 1873 to the time of the Fed, Canada is not actually having bank panics. So how come in the U.S. we see them again and again? It's because of regulation, it turns out. More regulation, less stability, believe it or not. At the state level, many of the states imposed unit banking laws, said every bank can have only one office. Well, that obviously makes every bank extremely fragile and undiversified. So when it came time for the Great Depression, 9,000 U.S. banks failed. You know how many Canadian banks failed? 0. And it's not because Canada had a central bank to rescue them. They didn't get their central bank till the mid-1930s. So they give us the phony narrative, and then they pose as the saviors, and people go for this.
When we come back, I want to introduce you to a man who risked jail just to read this book. I want to introduce you to somebody who understands the loss of freedom. And can you think of a book that you would... Can you even imagine yourself possibly going to jail to read a book? You'll meet him next. Tonight I have a story that you must hear. You must ask yourself at the end of this hour, what is America's future? What are we facing? And where do we go from here? What is your role in that decision? You probably have either heard or have said to somebody yourself, oh, this book, it changed my life. Did it really? And how much did you have vested in that book? How difficult was it for you to read? My next guest, he knows about the road to serfdom. First, you have to understand what he went through just to read the book. 1971, Soviet Union. If he was caught reading The Road to Serfdom, if anybody was caught reading Road to Serfdom, he could go to jail. You can find it in any library. You can go to the bookstore right now. You can go to Amazon, click, and get it. He would go to jail. The friend who gave him the book could get 12 years of hard labor for disseminating anti-socialist propaganda. He read the Road to Serfdom, and it changed his life. Years later, he, and I use this term, I know you're going to correct me on it, defected from the Soviet Union. His name is Yuri Maltsev. He is the professor of economics at Carthage College. Yes, somebody who grew up in the Soviet Union teaching economics. And he's better than all the clowns in Washington. He is also the editor of Requiem for Marx. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you. I'm very well.
I have been looking forward to speaking to you today because you were actually in college when you read it. And you were allowed to read this book, but it was like one of those books that was kept under lock and key, right?
Yes. Later, after I read the book, I've changed my major to economic history and history of economic thought. So then they gave me permission to read under closed doors, and I would write kind of a pledge that I will never tell anybody about the book, which I'm breaking right now.
Well, you might be arrested by our own DOJ any day soon on this. When you read it, what was it that connected with you?
What was amazing for me, it was kind of like developing a film. I mean, a lot of things that I was thinking about, because if you were born in the Soviet Union, raised in the Soviet Union, then you can see a country which was really too big to fail, failed. And it was not providing enough food, enough clothes, enough housing, enough anything for these people. And we were trying to figure out why. And definitely we're looking for answers. And these answers were all there in this.
Did you ever discuss them in college? You could read it, but could you then discuss it and say, hey, we're doing all these things. Maybe that's the problem.
Yes, then you would discuss it in Eastern Siberia and hard labor camp.
Right.
And no, I would discuss it only with people I trusted. Back in all socialist countries, usually people would have a group of people whom they trust. And then otherwise it would be impossible to survive. But you were all the time very much aware that you could be reported. My wife brought me to the mall this weekend. And that's always a great experience. Standing there with the dresses by the hangers, and she's in the other room. You're just like, no, I don't need any help. Nothing fits me in this dress size.